we're going to start with that 9:05 Derby AGR. I was there at that one on Saturday. It was another really hot one at York Lions Stadium. But it was a good one. It was a much more, I think, entertaining game than the last really hot midday game we had at York Lions Stadium, which was at that 0-0 with Atletico Ottawa. This was billed as possibly one of the most exciting and anticipated 9:05 derbies in a long time. Forge come into the game 17 unbeaten in the CPL. York were aiming for a club record. They had 7 unbeaten. They were looking for that 8. Didn't get it, but we thought that maybe these two clubs were at their best when they come up against each other here. But AGR did this game live up to its billing. And are you? We can get to it in a second, but were you a little disappointed that York maybe didn't make more of a fight of it?
Yeah, I thought this was a good game, and what you hoped and expected, especially like you mentioned, York Lions Stadium at noon to 1 o'clock hasn't always produced the most favorable of fixtures this year. I really think of that Ottawa one a few months ago and a couple others like it. But both teams, especially Forge, really had a bit of a go. And you kind of wondered with the Whitecaps coming up on Wednesday, rotation, just playing on the road, if maybe Forge would be the team that would sit back a little more. And because they've shown this year that they have a bit of that in them. You really think of what they did in Ottawa, where they got that early goal and just sat back. But Forge wanted to have a bit of a go, and to their credit, they got that early goal. York finds a way to get one out of nowhere, but then Forge kept pushing, and they get a huge result because, man, what's going on with them in Ottawa and the table right now is remarkable. Both are just kind of on these bonkers pace, and it's really hard to pick out the better story. But for me, just looking at 18 unbeaten for Forge, just really, it's a staggering amount in a league where you play every team 4 times. To think that they've played Ottawa twice, all these other great teams, Calgary, Halifax, and York, of course, and yet to lose. And now they pick up a huge road win at York Lions Stadium. It's a remarkable campaign so far.
Yeah, it absolutely is. 18 unbeaten in the league, which is just unprecedented. 21, I think, in all competitions, including a Canadian Championship, which we will obviously get to in a little bit, by the way. But this Forge team, I mean, really, we just have an incredible heavyweight scrap at the top of the table. Forge and Ottawa refusing to take their foot off the gas in any way. Still separated by just 1 point at the top there, and they play each other next weekend, by the way. Forge and Atletico Ottawa. That one is going to be very, very interesting. Although, again, you see these games at the top of the table, and sometimes the fear of losing trumps the impetus to win, because you are in trouble. Like, certainly, if Ottawa were to lose to Forge, then it'd be 4 points back. Not an insurmountable gap, but that is a lot of fun. Let's stick with Forge, though. I think one of the biggest stories for me is Tristan Borges. Right, he scores in this game. Until last week against Valor, he hadn't scored in the CPL yet all year. He's now scored in back-to-back games. He had 2 chances created in this game, 4 successful dribbles, wins 7 duels. He's all over the place. Tristan Borges has now scored 8 career goals against York United. That's the most for any Forge player in any fixture. The only player in the CPL that scored more against any one team is Alejandro Diaz, who I think has scored 9 against Valor. But we'll probably talk about him a little bit later on the show too. But AGR Borges, the reigning CPL player of the year, hasn't been at his best this year and is still unbeaten. So how scary is it for other teams that he looks like he's getting there now?
Yeah, I think that's it. Just adds a different dimension to their attack to have what he brings, because you see it in this game where he's a goal threat. That first and foremost, he's a goal scorer. You see with the goal he scored against Valor. You see with this goal, like, just the way he kind of finds the space, gets in that soft spot touch. And as soon as he's one of those players, as soon as he takes that touch, there's no worry that he's going to blast it or hit it wide. You knew it was going in the net, and that's
Yeah.
clinical. When you look at the second goal, the way he just drops a little deeper and orchestrates play. Sometimes with Forge, the challenge, when you're facing teams, they're going to sit back and then they respect you with all the talent that you have. And when you have a guy like Borges that can find space and break lines, it just makes a huge difference, because Forge are always going to have willing runners, the way, a
Yeah.
guy Nana and Pomo will run in behind. And, even they get some late runs for their midfielders. In that case was Noah Jensen kind of breaking the lines. Having a guy who can drop deep and be a bit of a playmaker, it's huge. for Borges, it just makes a big difference because you look at the lineup in this game, you're leaving out a guy like Mo Babuli on the bench against his former club. You're leaving out Brian Wright, but by having Borges, you're not missing a beat. You're able to throw in a Max Fillion up front. You know who's going to press, who's going to give you energy, opening up space for a Borges. So again, with Forge, really the story continues to be just an embarrassing bag of riches of depth across the field, but especially in the attack. And that's huge because they defend really well now. That's their thing. But it does help that they can break games open too. And you saw it in
Yeah.
Montreal when Borges scored a banger. And I think now that that's translating to CPL play is a bit of a scary thought because Forge haven't clicked as much offensively as they should. The reason why they're 18 undefeated is just because they don't really concede much. Again, you don't really lose when you're conceding 0-1 a game, but if they can get some goals, that could really be the difference in keeping pace and maybe even separating a bit from Ottawa in that table.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, obviously we're pretty deep into the season now, but it is kind of a new Forge attack from what it was last year with guys like Babuli and Wright coming in. But Tristan Borges is always going to have a place in his team when he's healthy. And what I like about him coming from midfield and not playing, kind of on the wing is he helps create those numerical overlaps up top, right? He kind of allows Ampoma to maybe get a little bit wider when he needs to, or to get on the ball, and Borges makes the run into the box. Like there's just always bodies for Forge in the final third. But the depth as well is crazy. Like you mentioned, Babuli and Wright on the bench. Kyle Becker's on the bench in this game, right? Like this is technically a game where Bobby Smirniotis rotated his squad fairly significantly ahead of the Whitecaps on Wednesday. And it'd be hard to tell, right? Forge has an entire bench in this game of players that would start for most teams in the CPL. And then nobody on the pitch in the starting 11 either looks out of place. Even Maxime Fillion, he scores in this game with the start. I think just his second start for the club over his first season there. But a scary thought to think of Forge maybe still not even peaking in this year where Bobby's not saying it out loud, but we can. They're aiming for an invincible year. At this point, they've been through every CPL team, I think twice at least. Who is going to stop them? That is a very tricky question that so far the answer has been nobody. But just quickly, we'll wrap up with York here because they made a couple changes in the lineup that I actually liked. Gabby Bitar comes in for Massimo Ferrin, and Lionel Lopez obviously makes his first start for the club. He has they both have an instant impact, obviously combining for York's goal. But AGR, did you see maybe York getting a little shaken in the first half? They kind of might have wanted to come into the game like the Ottawa match a week before, where they're going to absorb possession and maybe withstand and kind of frustrate the opponent. But when you concede early like they did, you kind of have to change on the fly, and that can be frustrating. So did you see York maybe kind of struggling to adjust after they got scored on, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think for York, just after the last few weeks where they were just so good defensively, I think it will obviously hurt the confidence a bit to concede some goals. So I think that obviously stands out as well. They they obviously chopped and changed a little bit, which maybe you wonder if that, especially up front, I thought really York up front was where they were maybe lacking. I mean, they had 0.59 expected goals at home. That's a game that obviously you're playing Forge, but given what they have up front, you do wonder, like, was it bringing out a guy like Massimo Ferrin? Could he have been a guy that could have stuck, and especially has a pretty good record against Forge, and loves this.
If you want to play on the counter,
exactly. If you want to play on the counter too, having a bit of that speed. To be fair, bringing in Shola Jimo helped with his speed, but again, he coming in off the bench, he wasn't able to find those final actions. So for York, I think the big thing they'll look at is the attack, because I think for the most part, the defense will be fine. It has been fine. Granted, the first goal is not one that they'll be too happy with, because I think a big key to their success again has been their aggression, how how front-footed they are, and the fact that they kind of drop back and let Borges get as open as they did. So for York, it's little things like on that day, you got to match that aggression. You got to keep that sort of energy high, and then offensively they just looked off. But on the offensive side, they've got enough weapons, they've got enough pieces where I think they're gonna bounce back and find that balance, but defensively they'll just want to keep going. And for the most part, they have. Sometimes you just come up against a good team and they punish you, and it kind of corrects you, so to speak. And I think York will definitely feel that.